So we see that the American people were sick of forever wars and nation building that were costly. They harmed America's standing in the world and rarely successful. So for this reason, the Americans voted for Trump, who consistently criticized these kind of wars and advocated for America first instead. So, so obviously we have not gone down this path. There's a lot of criticism, of course, his base is split. But from a realist perspective, though, what are the strategic interests of the United States in Venezuela, besides the stated reasons such as democracy promotion or narco-terrorism? What do you think the United States aims to achieve with this?
Well, when you talk about America's interests in the Western Hemisphere, it's important to understand that the Monroe Doctrine basically lays out what our interests are. What we want to make sure happens is that no distant great power, whether it's Imperial Germany, Nazi Germany, or the Soviet Union in Europe, or Imperial Japan or China today in East Asia, forms a military alliance with a country in the Western Hemisphere or puts their own military forces in the Western Hemisphere, as the Soviets did with regard to the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's what the Monroe Doctrine is really all about. It's keeping distant great powers out of the Western Hemisphere, which we, of course, dominate because we're so powerful. Now, this operation had nothing to do with the Monroe Doctrine. There's no danger at this point in time that either China or Russia is going to form a military alliance with Venezuela or is thinking about putting their military forces in the Western Hemisphere. This is just not an issue. This is not about great power politics, which is what the Monroe Doctrine is all about. This is, in my opinion, a good old-fashioned case of imperialism. This is a case where the United States was interested in running the politics of Venezuela. Apparently, if you listen to President Trump, his most important concern is who controls the oil in Venezuela. And he thinks basically that's our oil. It's ours to determine what it is used for and how it is used. This is just blatant imperialism or neocolonialism. This has little to do with the Monroe Doctrine.
Well, the US has intervened in the past in Latin America more than once, but do you see this as being consistent with this kind of patterns, or is this something different? Because it feels more brazen than it perhaps was in the past. The as you said, there were open reference to taking the oil, for example, and while Trump said that we will run Venezuela now, he now has argued that that the new acting president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, that she could hold power in Caracas as long as, and this is a quote, she does what we want. Otherwise, there will be more strikes. I mean, well, is this not needing to get rid of the existing government as long as they do as they're told? I mean, how are you seeing or assessing this?
Well, Glenn, there's really nothing new here. As almost everybody knows, the United States has a rich history of interfering in the politics of countries in the Western Hemisphere. We view any country that is moving toward the left to be a threat to us. And we invariably go in and try to topple the regime. You want to remember that President Trump is not only talking about doing regime change and social engineering in Venezuela these days, he's also hinting in a quite overt way that we may do Colombia, we may do Nicaragua, we may even do Mexico. The United States, he believes, has a vested interest in interfering in the politics of any country in the hemisphere that he doesn't like. And this is really nothing new. The United States has a rich history in this regard. Chile in 1973, Guatemala in 1954, on and on. But what makes this so brazen to use your word, which I think is absolutely correct, is that Trump doesn't try to justify what he's done with diplomatic language or liberal rhetoric. He basically says, in very blunt terms, that we can run Venezuela. It's no problem. And Venezuela's oil is our oil. And he sounds like a blatant imperialist. And you don't see much evidence of that. Usually, when the United States goes in and acts in an imperial way in the Western Hemisphere, it covers up its behavior with liberal or idealistic rhetoric. But President Trump doesn't act that way. He's a Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of guy. You can see him coming a mile away. He's very blunt, and therefore it's appropriate to say that this does look brazen.
Well, what does this mean, though, for the wider world order? Because over the past 30 years, the so-called liberal rules-based order entailed more or less that the idea that international law would apply to everyone, with the exception of the West under the leadership of the United States, because we were the champions of liberal democracy, so international law could be put aside if it was required for liberal democracy or humanitarian law. So this was kind of an important part of the hegemonic order, and to a large extent, we saw this being born in Kosovo when we said that well, it wasn't legal, but it was legitimate. So essentially, we said liberal democracy creates legitimacy outside the rule of law. So this was kind of the how we can run an empire, a hegemonic system, and give it all legitimacy. And I feel, in terms of attacking Venezuela, the Europeans, we did our part. That is, we gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Machado under the idea that, if the United States would go in with its military force, this would mean to install democracy, and this will be peace. I mean, this is the whole liberal, the peace thesis, that the democracies don't go to war, they're more peaceful, etc., and that this can be delivered by military force. But we saw instead that Trump, he didn't take it. It was a nice layup. He could have had this legitimacy, but he said he didn't want this excuse. He was even dismissive of Machado taking over power. And instead, he referred to how much a tremendous amount of wealth we're going to take out of the ground. Should it worry us, though? I mean, that Washington now doesn't bother to keep up the pretense. On one hand, it's nice with some honesty. On the other hand, it's important stories we tell about ourselves, that we kind of have some restraint by at least pretending to abide by certain ideals.
Yes, for sure. Let's just talk a little bit about international law. As you know, when the United States was the unipole, this is during the unipolar moment, from roughly 1993 until about 2017. We're really the only great power on the system, and we threw our weight around all over the world. We nevertheless paid careful attention to international law. And if we violated international law, we went to great lengths to say we really were not violating international law. Now, what's going on there? The fact is that you need international law. You need international institutions. You need rules. In an incredibly interdependent world like the one that we live in, rules and laws are absolutely essential. And the key point to keep in mind here is that the United States wrote almost all of the rules and almost all of the laws. So we had little problem obeying the rules or obeying the law most of the time, because again, we wrote them in ways that were in our national interest. But along comes President Trump, and he really is sui generis here. He has utter contempt for international law, international norms. He just thinks they don't matter. And he thinks when he goes out and breaks the law, that it's not necessary to justify what he did. It's not necessary to put the velvet glove over the mailed fist. And the end result is that international law, the rules-based system, is being trashed. And the question you have to ask yourself, is this in the American national interest, or is it in the interest of other countries around the world? And I would argue that it's not in our interest. Again, we need rules, we need laws, we need norms. And the reason that past presidents have paid so much attention to these matters is because they understand that. But Trump doesn't think that's true. He just thinks that he can go out and trash the rules-based system. And the end is that we will be better off. And with regard to other countries, the truth is he doesn't care about other countries. He only cares about the United States of America and what he thinks is right or wrong. So that's really what's going on here. And the end result is not going to be good because international law is important for the United States and for other countries as well.
I noticed from some speeches by Hegseth, he treats international law as if it would be some woke plot that constrains America from pursuing its interests. But again, in situations like war, we have international law has to be some mutual constraint, as we have some framework, around killing each other that limits it and make it in a civilized manner as possible. And but also again, with the stories we tell each other, though. I mean, with when Biden blew up the Nord Stream, or allegedly blew up the Nord Stream, but yes, very likely he did. The Germans were willing to. The chancellor was willing to stand next by him and pretend as if when he said, "Oh, it wasn't us," that they were. Biden was selling a lie. The Germans were very willing to buy it, even though no one, I think, truly believed it was the Russians who blew up their own pipeline, but at least the pretense was there. Now there's nothing. Even the Germans now, the chancellor is asking, well, what is the legal justification? We need something. At least give us a narrative. Say that this is about, an authoritarian dictator, but just oil. That it seems that there's some real anxiety.